I showed you what a data set would look like in a correlational study that just is using questionnaires. Now I wanted to show you what a data set would look like in an experiment in which a researcher is assigning people to different conditions. So in an experiment, you would have a column for your independent variable and a column for your dependent variable. Let's say that that I'm assigning people to take a memory test in a 60-degree room or a 90-degree room. I'm assigning people to two different temperatures to see if it has an effect on their memory. So I would have one column for my independent variable of temperature. Um, every person who is assigned to the 60-degree room would have a 60 entered. So if I'm assigning 10 people to the 60-degree room, they would all have a 60. Every person who was assigned to the 90-degree room would have a 90 in the spreadsheet. So if I'm assigning 10 people to the 90-degree room, they would have 90s entered. So these are my 10 people who were assigned to the 60-degree room. These are my 10 people who were assigned to the 90-degree room. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9. That's actually only 9, so I need to add one more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10. So now it's 10 and 10. Here I would just have a column for each person's recall score, meaning if I'm giving each person a recall test, asking them, testing how many items they remembered from the list, each person would have a recall score. So if this person who was in the 60-degree room was able to remember, let's say, 10 items from the list, they would have a recall score of 10. Let's say that I'm showing each person a list of 12 two-digit numbers, and I'm just testing each person to see how many of those 12 numbers they can remember. If a person is able to correctly remember 10 of the 12 numbers, they would get a recall score of 10. If this person was able to remember 8 items out of 12, their recall score would be 8. And if this person was able to remember 7 items, their recall score would be 7. Maybe this person remembers 8, maybe 7, 6, maybe 8 again. This might be 7. But overall, they're doing pretty well because they're in a room that's only 60 degrees. They're not experiencing a hot temperature. And the people in the 90-degree room should usually have lower scores. So maybe a 4, a 3, maybe this person remembers 5. Maybe one person does really well even though they're in a 90-degree room. So maybe this person remembers 8. Because some people probably will do well even though they're in the hot temperature, because every person is a different individual. So maybe one person gets a 7, a 6, a 4, and then a 3, and then a 4. So the people inside this group, these 10 people, are getting different scores from each other because each person is a different person. Um, a person's recall ability has to do with other things besides just temperature. It might have to do with their own memory capacity and also how much sleep they've had, how much they've had to eat, caffeine, and things like that. These 10 people will also have different scores from each other because they're all different people. But overall, these 10 scores look higher and these 10 scores look lower. So if we calculated the average of these 10 scores from the 60-degree room and calculated the average of these 10 scores from the 90-degree room, this average should be higher and this average should be lower. We can do that right now. So we type in equals average parentheses and highlight the 10 recall scores from the 60-degree group, and then close the parentheses and press enter. If we press enter, it'll give us the average of these 10 people, the average recall score. So all it did was just add the 10 scores and divide the total by 10 to get an average. And it was 7.6, which is pretty good for recall. They were able to remember an average of 7.6 items. Down here, we can calculate the average of the 90-degree participants. Equals average, parentheses, highlight their 10 recall scores, and then divide and then close the parentheses and press enter. Their average was only 4.9. So it looks like overall the 10 people in the 90-degree room did do worse than the 10 people in the 60-degree group. They did worse because their average recall score was lower. So this is what a data set would look like in an experiment in which you're comparing two conditions. So these two numbers, 60 and 90, would be called the levels of my independent variable. So my independent variable is actually temperature. It's the independent variable is what I'm manipulating. It's what I'm controlling in my experiment. So since I'm assigning people to different temperatures, I'm manipulating the variable of temperature. So it's my independent variable. The specific temperatures that I decide to use are called the levels of my independent variable. So my independent variable is temperature, and the two levels of temperature in my experiment are 60 and 90. If I had decided to compare three temperatures, like let's say I had decided to compare 60, 80, and 100, I would have had my independent variable still would have been temperature, but would have had three levels in my experiment. The three levels would have been 60, 80, and 100 in that case. So my independent variable is temperature. The levels of the independent variable are just the specific temperatures that I decided to use in my experiment. My dependent variable is recall, because the dependent variable is what the researcher is measuring or recording to see whether or not the independent variable had an effect on the participants. So the researcher manipulates the independent variable by assigning the participants to different levels of the independent variable, and then the researcher records the dependent variable right here to see if the independent variable had the effect that it was supposed to have. So once again, my independent variable is temperature. The specific levels of temperature in my experiment are 60 and 90, and the dependent variable is recall.